just seconds before a $120 million corporate pitch goes live. A black waitress named Alicia Morgan calmly glances at the boardroom screen and whispers, "That's the wrong formula." Laughter. Scoffs. A sharp glare from CEO Brandon Whitmore. But within moments, that quiet warning threatens to unravel everything, and might be the only thing that saves them. What no one in that room knows is that Alicia isn't just a server. She's a once-celebrated math prodigy who left academia at 19 to care for her family. Years of brilliance buried beneath catering trays and coffee cups. As Thornridge Solutions prepares for the biggest investor call of its history, Alicia recognizes a critical flaw in the financial model, an error the entire boardroom missed. Her correction isn't just right, it saves the company from public disaster. And when a second error is discovered moments before the live broadcast, it's Alicia who calmly steps in, models a new formula in real time, and proves herself beyond question. By the end of the day, she's no longer the woman they overlooked. She's the reason they survived. The company doesn't just recover, it evolves. Alicia is offered a leadership role, and an OFOR innovation lab is founded in her name. Her journey becomes a symbol of the genius that's often hidden in plain sight, because sometimes the person carrying the coffee holds the formula to your future. The 15th floor of the Whitmore Conference Tower was all glass, tension, and ticking clocks. At exactly 11:48 a.m., the leadership team of Thornridge Solutions was finalizing a $120 million investor pitch one that would determine the company's future. Executives adjusted their suits, analysts refreshed spreadsheets, and CEO Brandon Whitmore rehearsed his introduction. Everything seemed perfect, until a quiet voice interrupted from the hallway. "Excuse me," said Alicia Morgan, a black waitress balancing a tray of cappuccinos. "That formula on your screen is off." At first, the room froze in disbelief. Then came the dismissive chuckles, the irritated glances. Brandon's jaw tightened. "You're a waitress. What do you know about our model?" But Alicia didn't flinch. She calmly pointed out a miscalculation, a growth coefficient off by .06. That would have dramatically overstated the company's 3-year forecast. Her correction stunned the room. When they ran the numbers, she was right. And that was only the beginning. Alicia wasn't just any waitress. At 19, she was a nationally recognized mathematics champion. She had once stood before professors and detailed predictive analytics models few as adults could grasp. But her academic journey had been cut short when her mother suffered a stroke. With no health insurance, Alicia dropped out of school to care for her younger brother and support the family. For years, she remained invisible, serving coffee, calculating in her head, hiding her brilliance in plain sight. Until that day, as the countdown to the live broadcast continued, another error was discovered in the slide deck. Panic spread. The company was minutes from presenting faulty data to investors. That's when Alicia stepped forward again. Without hesitation, she rewrote the model in real time, correcting assumptions about customer behavior post-pandemic and stabilizing the revenue projections. Her formula wasn't just mathematically sound. It was elegant, conservative, and aligned perfectly with recent market trends. Brandon, skeptical but desperate, gave her the floor. Alicia spoke for just 90 seconds during the live pitch. Clear, confident, and utterly grounded in facts. The investors were impressed. Minutes later, the deal was approved. Thornridge Solutions had been saved, not by a board member or a senior executive, but by a woman whose brilliance had long been overlooked. In the aftermath, Alicia's identity came to light. Articles from 7 years ago resurfaced. Mathematical prodigy Alicia Morgan wins National Modeling Championship. Photos of her beside whiteboards filled with equations. Professors once called her a once-in-a-decade mind. Then silence. No graduate studies. No publications. Until now. Brandon knew he couldn't let that brilliance fade again. He offered Alicia a strategic consulting role and proposed something bolder: the creation of the Morgan Lab for strategic innovation, a space inside the company to uplift underrepresented talent in STEM. 2 weeks later, Alicia stood on stage at the company's first Equity and Innovation Forum. No apron, no tray, just a slate gray blazer and unwavering poise. She told the audience, "Talent is everywhere. It's access that's rare." Her words echoed, not just through the auditorium, but across industries that had ignored too many voices like hers. And so, Alicia's journey, once silenced by hardship, became a call to listen more closely to the quiet ones, the unseen ones, the ones who just might be holding the formula to our future. When Alicia Morgan quietly corrected a critical formula moments before a $120 million pitch, she didn't just save a company, she triggered a cultural transformation. Thornridge Solutions had built its success on control, polish, and hierarchy. But the moment Alicia, a black waitress in a catering uniform, revealed a mistake the board hadn't noticed, everything changed. At first, she was dismissed. CEO Brandon Whitmore scoffed. Executives exchanged looks. But when Alicia calmly explained the math and proved the projected growth was based on outdated churn data, they realized they had no choice but to listen. She rewrote the formula on the whiteboard without permission, correcting not just the error but the very lens through which the company viewed customer behavior. And when a second flaw was found minutes before going live, Alicia once again stepped forward, modeling a conservative yet realistic solution on the spot. Her corrections led to a cleaner, stronger forecast. The investors were impressed. The deal was approved. But what happened next was more powerful than the numbers. After the pitch, whispers turned into conversations. Who was she? How did she know this? Why had no one noticed her before? A junior analyst, Meera Patel, dug into Alicia's background. She discovered that Alicia had once been a mathematical prodigy winner of a national modeling competition, hailed as a once-in-a-decade mind. But after her mother's stroke and financial crisis, Alicia had left academia and disappeared from the data science world. No one had heard from her since, until now. The realization sent ripples through the company. Alicia had walked their halls, served their drinks, and been invisible, while carrying knowledge that could outmatch their entire data team. For Brandon, it was humbling. He had built Thornridge on the belief that merit rises, but he'd never looked past resums and boardrooms, so he did something few CEOs have the courage to do. He handed Alicia the microphone. At Thornridge's first ever Equity and Innovation Forum, Brandon introduced Alicia not as a token, but as the reason the company still existed. She stepped onto the stage, not in an apron, but in a tailored blazer. She spoke with calm power. "I didn't leave this field. I just stopped being seen in it. Talent is everywhere. It's access. That's rare." The applause was thunderous, and behind the scenes, the leadership team had already approved something bigger: the creation of the Morgan Lab for Strategic Innovation, a space within Thornridge dedicated to finding and developing hidden talent, those who've been overlooked because of a job title, skin color, or zip code. In the weeks that followed, the company's culture began to shift. Junior voices were invited to pitch. Hiring processes were reevaluated. Departments began seeking insight from unexpected places. And Alicia, now officially a lead strategist, didn't just influence numbers, she influenced mindsets. Her story became more than a corporate anecdote. It became a parable, because Alicia Morgan didn't ask for attention. She didn't beg for a seat. She simply told the truth. And in doing so, she reminded an entire company that brilliance isn't always loud, and Genius doesn't always come in a suit. The moment Alicia Morgan stepped onto the stage, not as a server, but as the strategist who saved a $120 million deal. She rewrote more than a company's financial model. She rewrote what leadership looked like, what brilliance could sound like, and most of all, who deserves to be seen. Weeks earlier, she had been wiping down trays in a quiet catering kitchen. Now, standing in a slate gray blazer before an audience of CEOs, journalists, and aspiring innovators, she spoke not just about numbers, but about justice. "I didn't leave this field," she said, voice steady. "I just stopped being seen in it." Her story echoed far beyond the walls of Thornridge Solutions. After the firm launched the Morgan Lab for Strategic Innovation in her honor, Alicia made a decision that surprised even her new colleagues. She wanted to teach. On a bright Saturday morning at a small community center in her old neighborhood, Alicia stood before a group of black girls aged 8 to 12. No spotlight, no suits, just notebooks, open minds, and curiosity. On the whiteboard behind her, "How math solves real problems." She lifted a receipt and asked, "If your mom's rent increases by 4%, but her paycheck stays the same, how can you help her plan better?" At first, the girls were shy, but as Alicia broke down budgeting like a puzzle, the room shifted, pencils scribbled, heads nodded, eyes lit up. The math was no longer intimidating. It was empowering. Then a girl, no older than 10, raised her hand timidly and asked, "Were you scared? When you told all those people they were wrong?" Alicia knelt to her level and smiled. "I was terrified," she admitted softly. "But I was more afraid of being silent forever." That moment, simple, unfiltered, captured the heart of Alicia's transformation. She hadn't spoken up in that boardroom for recognition. She did it because she couldn't unsee the truth. And now, she was passing that courage on to a new generation of girls who might one day change the world, but who first needed someone to tell them it was possible. Outside the classroom, Thornridge's stock continued to rise. Internally, the culture shifted. Voices once dismissed were invited in. Leadership no longer looked like one face or came from one background. And at the center of that ripple was Alicia, still soft-spoken, still thoughtful, but no longer hidden. She once said, "Talent is everywhere. It's access that's rare." Her lab became a beacon for thinkers without titles, for dreamers without degrees, for brilliance that never got a chance to shine. One day, as she and her now college-bound brother Noah ate takeout at their kitchen table, he pointed at the television, where a business show flashed her name across the screen. Former Waitress, now leading innovation at Thornridge. He laughed. "That's you." Alicia rolled her eyes, clicked off the television, and said with a grin, "Let's not make it weird." But the truth was, it was revolutionary. Because Alicia's story isn't just about math or money. It's about visibility, dignity, and what happens when we choose to lift the curtain on overlooked brilliance. And when the next little girl raises her hand and says, "I want to do what you did, Alicia," we'll smile and say, "You already can." In a towering boardroom filled with high-ranking executives, polished shoes, and designer watches, Alicia Morgan stood at the edge, uninvited, unnoticed, and unimportant in their eyes. She wasn't wearing a blazer or holding a briefing folder. She carried a tray of coffee and a quiet mind trained by hardship, loss, and brilliance long ignored. Yet in under 2 minutes, with a single whispered sentence, she changed the trajectory of a $120 million corporate deal and forever altered how that room understood value. Just before Thornridge Solutions went live with their most critical investor presentation, Alicia glimpsed the projection screen while walking past. A formula, a key part of the frame, revenue forecast flashed across the display. Something didn't sit right. Her brows furrowed. The math was wrong. She could see it instantly. "Excuse me," she said softly from the doorway. That's the wrong formula. At first there was silence, then mocking smirks. She's a waitress. Someone scoffed. What could she possibly know? But Alicia didn't waver. She explained, calmly and concisely, that the company's model had used a fixed churn rate that no longer reflected post-pandemic customer behavior. Her correction, she said, wasn't a guess. It was data. Skepticism turned into anxiety when the junior tech team checked her claim and realized she was right. The room shifted. Panic rose. If the flawed formula went live, investors might pull out, suspecting fraud or incompetence. With only minutes to spare, Alicia did the unthinkable. She stepped forward, rewrote the model on the whiteboard, and offered a more accurate, defensible solution. And when the CEO, Brandon Whitmore, hesitated to trust her, she stood firm. I can't let you lie with numbers, she said. Not when I can see the truth. That moment exposed not just a financial flaw, but a cultural one. Thornridge had built its empire on surface-level credentials and closed-door decision-making. But the person who saved them didn't come from an Ivy League boardroom. She came from the kitchen. Alicia Morgan, it turned out, had once been a nationally celebrated math prodigy. At 19, she won a modeling championship for predictive analytics. Professors called her a once-in-a-decade thinker. But then life struck. Her mother collapsed from a stroke. Insurance failed. Them and Alicia dropped out to raise her younger brother and keep the family afloat. Her genius, left unseen, folded into a life of quiet survival. Until that boardroom. Until one moment when she decided that silence would cost more than courage. Her intervention didn't just salvage the pitch. It sealed the deal. The investors approved the merger. The company's value soared, and the story of the waitress who saved Thornridge became legend. But Alicia didn't ask for credit. She didn't step onto the stage to gloat. What she wanted, what she fought for, was to make sure no one else like her would be invisible again. That's why, when Thornridge offered her a permanent role, she proposed something bigger. The Morgan Lab for Strategic Innovation. A space for minds like hers, brilliant, unconventional, often ignored, to have a voice. Not because of their titles, but because of their insight. Soon, the lab was filled with coders from community colleges, single mothers who once dreamed of engineering, veterans with systems thinking experience but no formal degree. It became a hub of problem solvers who were never given a proper platform, until Alicia built one. At the company's first Equity and Innovation Forum, Alicia stood before the crowd and said, "We say talent rises to the top. But what if the top never sees you? I didn't leave this industry. I just disappeared beneath it. And I know I'm not the only one." The audience rose in thunderous applause. Her words had become more than a personal truth. They became a movement. In the final scene, Alicia walks into the Thornridge building, not with a tray, but with a tablet and confidence. The plaque near the lobby reads, "The Morgan Lab for Strategic Innovation, where overlooked brilliance builds the future." And somewhere in a quiet classroom across town, a young girl scribbles numbers on a notebook and dreams not of becoming visible, but of being heard. When Alicia Morgan corrected a flawed formula moments before a $120 million pitch, Thornridge Solutions was saved from potential disaster. But what happened after the applause faded would become even more transformative. Alicia didn't just solve an equation. She cracked open a system that had long ignored brilliance, wrapped in the wrong uniform. For years, Alicia had been part of the background. Quiet, efficient, invisible. She served Alistair coffee while executives walked past her without making eye contact. No one knew she once held a national title in mathematical modeling, or that she had once been called a once-in-a-decade mind by leading academics. They saw only an apron, not the intellect behind it. But after she saved the company's future with a last-minute correction based on deep knowledge of post-pandemic consumer trends, everything changed. CEO Brandon Whitmore was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. The person who had spotted the error wasn't in their data science team. She wasn't on any org chart. She wasn't even invited to the room. Her story sparked conversations far beyond the walls of the company. Business journals began writing about the Alicia effect, a corporate awakening to the hidden talent often overlooked in marginalized roles. Internally, Thornridge launched a formal inquiry into how many other Alicias had been ignored. The findings were sobering. Recruitment processes were restructured. Departments were asked to open project review sessions to voices across roles. Most importantly, Brandon approved the founding of the Brandon Morgan Lab for Strategic Innovation, a place within the company where anyone, regardless of title or background, could contribute to solving real-world problems through data, design, or insight. But Alicia's impact didn't stop there. Rather than bask in corporate praise, she turned her energy outward. She began hosting weekend workshops in her community, teaching young girls, especially from underrepresented backgrounds, how to use math to solve everyday challenges. She believed in turning equations into empowerment. One weekend, during a budgeting exercise, a young girl asked her, "Were you scared when you told them they were wrong?" Alicia smiled gently and replied, "Yes, but I was more scared of staying silent." That single sentence, soft but unforgettable, captured her entire journey. She hadn't spoken and up for recognition. She spoke up because truth deserved a voice, even if that voice came from someone society didn't expect. Meanwhile, the Morgan Lab flourished. Teams from around the country began visiting Thornridge to study its model for inclusion. The company's stock rose, but more importantly, so did its internal morale. Employees began to feel seen, not for their resumes, but for their contributions. In one powerful moment, Alicia stood in front of the board of directors during the launch of the lab. She said, "You almost lost everything. Not because you lacked data, but because you lacked perspective. Genius doesn't always wear a name tag you recognize." That line would later be quoted across LinkedIn posts, keynote speeches, and articles about modern leadership. Alicia Morgan's brilliance wasn't just in the formulas she wrote. It was in the doors she opened for others to walk through. And long after the boardroom had returned to business as usual, her presence lingered. Not as a shadow behind the scenes, but as the woman who made the system finally listen. When Alicia Morgan quietly stepped into the spotlight and corrected a $120 million corporate pitch moments before it went live, the world applauded her brilliance. But beneath the headlines, the viral video clips, and the investor praise lay something even more powerful. A story not of revenge, but of restoration. Of dignity rising where pride once ruled. In that now famous boardroom, Alicia was never meant to speak. She was a black waitress, carrying cappuccinos, not a consultant, not an analyst. But when she saw a flawed financial formula, the kind of error that could destroy a deal, she chose to say something. Her words were quiet, but her conviction was unshakable. "That's the wrong formula." The room scoffed. The CEO, Brandon Whitmore, dismissed her. But as panic grew and numbers unraveled, Alicia's correction became their lifeline. Within minutes, she rewrote their forecast model with stunning precision. And when a second error emerged, she calmly built a new solution in real time, saving the company not once, but twice. Still, she didn't ask for applause. She didn't demand a seat at the table. When Brandon turned to her and said, "You saved this company," she simply replied, "I just told the truth." That sentence landed heavier than any spreadsheet. Because the deeper victory wasn't in the numbers. It was in how Alicia carried herself. She didn't gloat. She didn't shame those who once ignored her. She reminded them what real leadership looks like. Humble, precise, rooted in truth. In the days that followed, the business world scrambled to find out who she was. A once celebrated math prodigy? A dropout forced by tragedy to give up her future? Yes. But she was more than that. She was a mirror, a reflection of every overlooked genius, every quiet woman, of color carrying brilliance while being unseen. And the most remarkable part? She didn't use the spotlight to tear others down. She used it to build something better. Instead of capitalizing on her moment of fame, Alicia helped Thornridge launch the Morgan Lab for Strategic Innovation, a program dedicated to surfacing hidden talent across all levels of the company. It wasn't about checking diversity boxes. It was about redefining what talent looked like. In one of her first public addresses after the launch, Alicia stood on stage and said, "I could have stayed angry. I could have walked out of that room and let them crash. But we don't need more broken things. We need builders. And dignity isn't something you demand. It's something you carry." That moment, raw, unfiltered, shifted the tone of an entire industry. People didn't just admire Alicia for her intelligence. They admired her for her restraint, her vision, and her strength to lead with grace, not ego. In a world obsessed with titles and instant wins, Alicia chose something harder: integrity. And because she did, not only did a company survive, a new standard was born. Her story is not just about fixing math. It's about fixing the lens through which we define brilliance. And in doing so, she proved something timeless. The greatest power isn't found in proving others wrong. It's in standing firm when no one expects you to be right. Long after the applause faded and the headlines quieted, Alicia Morgan found herself back, where everything truly began, not in a boardroom, but in a small community classroom filled with wide-eyed girls and notebooks full of questions. Dressed in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair tied back in a practical bun, Alicia stood before a group of black girls between the ages of 8 and 12. On the whiteboard behind her were words, simple but powerful: how math solves real problems. In that room, there were no investors, no CEOs, no live cameras. Just curiosity and potential. Alicia held up a receipt and posed a real-life challenge. If your mom gets paid bi-weekly and the rent goes up by 4%, how can you help her plan a better budget? The room stirred. Hands scribbled numbers. Pencils scratched paper. And for a moment, complex financial thinking felt like a game. Accessible, human, possible. Then a small girl raised her hand, hesitant but brave. Were you scared when you told them? They were wrong. Alicia paused. The room went still. I was terrified, she answered gently. But I was more afraid of staying silent forever. That one sentence carried more weight than any formula she'd ever solved. Because Alicia's story wasn't just about mathematics or corporate redemption. It was about the cost of silence and the power of courage. Her journey had started as a whisper in a hallway, correcting a $1 million mistake while carrying coffee. But what followed was extraordinary. The correction saved Thornridge. Solutions earned investor trust and sparked a cultural awakening in the corporate world. The company not only survived, but evolved. With Alicia's help, they launched the Morgan Lab for Strategic Innovation, a think tank dedicated to uplifting minds society often overlooked. People of color, working-class visionaries, dreamers without degrees but rich in insight. But to Alicia, her greatest impact wasn't in boardrooms. It was here in classrooms, in local centers, in neighborhoods that didn't always have access to inspiration. The Morgan Lab was only part of her vision. The other part, making sure the next Alicia Morgan never had to disappear before being seen. Her workshops taught more than formulas. They taught strategy, self-worth, and how to see math as a tool for life rent calculations, budgeting, savings, even small business plans. One mother later said, "My daughter used to be afraid of numbers. Now she comes home wanting to calculate our grocery bills." Alicia knew what it meant to be invisible. She had walked that path for years, serving coffee, mopping floors, running equations in her mind while being passed over. But now she stood firmly in the light. And instead of using it for herself, she turned it outward, creating space for others to shine. Years from now, those young girls won't just remember the formulas. They'll remember the woman who knelt to their level and said, "You can be brave, even when your voice shakes." Because legacy isn't built in loud moments. It's built in lasting ones. Alicia Morgan didn't just rewrite a financial model. She rewrote the future for herself, for her brother, and for every unseen genius waiting for a chance to be heard. And somewhere, in a classroom, the next whisper of truth is already forming. In the heart of Midtown Manhattan, sharp suits pass through gleaming glass doors, unaware that history was quietly rewriting itself, one elevator ride at a time. Jade Ellison, once a name no one in the corporate world recognized, now walked through the lobby of Thornwall Capital, not with a tray of coffee, but with a tablet, a briefcase, and a reputation that carried weight. As she stepped into the executive elevator, she passed a plaque, freshly mounted near reception. It read, "The Ellison Lab for Strategic Innovation, where overlooked brilliance builds the Bouders. Future." For years, Jade had been invisible. She moved through rooms no one invited her into, listened to strategies she was never meant to hear, and saw the cracks in models that experts couldn't fix. But what no one realized, until the moment she whispered, "That's the wrong formula," was that brilliance doesn't always wear a blazer. Sometimes it wears an apron and walks quietly between boardrooms, carrying truths too heavy to stay hidden. Her transformation wasn't the result of a promotion or applause. It was the result of courage. Courage to speak up when it would have been easier to stay silent. Courage to correct billion-dollar math while being dismissed as just a waitress. Courage to rise without resentment and build something better than what failed her. That courage didn't just save a corporate pitch. It exposed a deeper flaw. A culture, too, obsessed with titles to see the minds that never had a chance to wear them. And Jade, she didn't walk away. She walked forward. After the pitch was saved and the company redeemed, she could have left on her own terms, with her dignity intact. But she chose to stay, not to climb the ladder, but to rebuild it. The Ellison Lab for Strategic Innovation was born from that vision. A place where unconventional minds, whether high school dropouts, self-taught coders, or immigrants with degrees no one validated, could solve real problems and be taken seriously. The lab didn't just hire people, it empowered them. It became the very space Jade had once needed. A room where your truth mattered more than your resume. A table where your insight spoke louder than your title. A future where no one had to beg to be seen. And Jade led it, not as a figurehead, but as a mentor. She hosted strategy sessions, taught practical math workshops, and insisted that every solution be grounded in ethics, equity, and elegance. Because for her, innovation wasn't just about ideas. It was about access. As her name became etched in corporate memory, reporters asked, "How does it feel to go from the kitchen to the C-suite?" She smiled, never missing a beat. "I didn't climb up. I cleared space for others." Jade's story reminds us, genius isn't always loud, and power doesn't always come with a title. Sometimes, the strongest voice in the room is the one no one expected to speak, and sometimes it's that quiet voice, the one carrying coffee, that ends up building the future. As the elevator doors closed, her reflection glanced back one last time. No longer unseen. No longer underestimated. Just Jade whole, heard, and finally, home. In a quiet classroom filled with laughter and notebooks, Jade Ellison knelt beside a young girl who had just asked, "Were you scared when you told all those people they were wrong?" Jade smiled softly and replied, "I was terrified, but I was more afraid of being silent forever." That moment, tender, honest, and deeply human, captured the soul of Jade's journey. She didn't just correct a formula that saved a $120 million deal. She corrected a system that had silenced people like her for far too long. And now, instead of sitting in boardrooms filled with polished suits, Jade sits with the next generation teaching young black girls not just math, but how to trust their own voice. She didn't seek fame. She didn't want revenge. What she wanted, what she built, was a future where no one had to be invisible to be powerful. Real strength isn't about being loud or being right. It's about being brave enough to speak the truth when no one expects you to. Your uniform doesn't define your worth. Your silence doesn't protect your light. When you speak, even softly, you can shift everything. If Jade's story moved you, tell us in the comments. Have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Or had your voice finally heard after being overlooked? We read every single story. And if you believe in lifting hidden voices, don't forget to like, comment, and hit like. Subscribe. Because the world needs more stories that remind us. Brilliance doesn't ask for permission. It just shows up.